Welcome, one and all, Super Wednesdays here in the Holy Land, Holy Apple. We're on the third day of Hanukkah 5779. That makes it the 27th of Kislev. And today we have the finale, the grand finale of the shocking real story of Hanah and her 7 sons. This is the conclusion. Before we get into it, a friend of mine, I have to give him a hat tip. A friend of mine, Rabbi Schechter, sent me this article. It appeared in the New York Times. It appeared a couple days ago. And it's really great. So I'm going to read it. I'm going to read the whole article. It's worth hearing. Any of you out there have seen the article by Rabbi Hanah, Down with Hanukkah, will appreciate much this article. It's by a novelist. His name is Michael David Lucas. Okay, here we go. Enjoy. This is no additional charge for this article. It's the question that Jewish parents instinctively dread. A few months ago, I was sitting on the couch with my 3-year-old daughter, watching some YouTube videos about animals in space. When out of nowhere, she looked up to me and said, "Dada, can we celebrate Xmas?" "We don't celebrate Xmas," I told her, putting on my serious voice. "We celebrate Hanukkah." Like generations of Jewish parents before me, I did my best to sell her on the relative merits of Hanukkah. True, Xmas might have those sparkly trees, ornaments, and fruitcakes. But we have latkes, jelly donuts, and 8 night of gifts. "Do we have Santa, Dada?" she asked, hopefully. "No," I said, and her face dropped. "They do." I tried to reiterate the part about the jelly donuts and the 8 night of presents, but she wasn't having any of it. I can't say I blame her. During the rest of the year, the Jewish holidays we celebrate are like special bonus celebrations we get to have on top of everything else going on the calendar. With Hanukkah and Xmas, however, it's a zero-sum game. I guess we lose. Most of the year, it isn't hard for our family to feel both American and Jewish. But in December, when there are wreaths and Peppa Pig Xmas specials and inflatable Santas everywhere you look, their dual identity becomes more of a question. Which is why Hanukkah is a big deal for mostly assimilated Jews like myself. The only trouble is the actual holiday. Not the latkes and the dreidels, but the story of Hanukkah, which at its heart is an 8 night long celebration of religious fundamentalism and violence. For most of the past 2,000 years, Hanukkah was an afterthought on the Jewish calendar, a wintertime festival of lights during which people spun tops and ate greasy food to commemorate what has to be one of God's least impressive miracles, a small container of oil that lasted for 8 nights. Now, sometimes when you hear this Mr. Lucas fellow, he hit on a point here which many rabbis have not reached this level of understanding, that they turned the whole holiday of Hanukkah into this celebration of some oil that turns into 8 days, which was in the times of the Talmud and in other instances in the time of the Torah were commonplace. So he hits on this. This is one of the least of God's miracles. More recently, as Jews have become assimilated into American society, the holiday has evolved into a kind of Semitic sidekick for Xmas, a minor festival pumped up into something it was never meant to be, so that the Jewish kids won't feel bad about not having a tree. I mean, this article is classic. Just gotta love it. This is the version of Hanukkah that I grew up with. Presents, chocolate gelt, latkes with the sour cream and add applesauce, a few somber off-key songs that no one fully remembered about Judah Maccabee. This is the version of Hanukkah I had in mind when my daughter and I walked down to our local branch of Oakland's public library to check out a stack of books on this holiday of Hanukkah. Most of the books we found presented a familiar narrative. Dreidels, those are those tops, menorahs, and pious Maccabees doing battle against their enemies. But between the lines, there were some hints of a darker story. Enough to send me to Wikipedia and the Book of the Maccabees. And on the definitely not Jewish, but very helpful Bible Gateway website, which led me back to the library for another stack of books. This one for myself, not his 3-year-old daughter. According to most modern scholars and a few rabbis I called on to help me out, the story of Hanukkah is based on a historical conflict between the Maccabees and the Hellenized Jews. The former being religious zealots who lived in the hills of Judea and practiced an ancient form of guerrilla warfare. The latter being mostly city-dwelling assimilationists who ate pork, didn't circumcise their male children, and made the occasional sacrifice offering to pagan gods. Some of the details are up for debate, depending on which texts you consult. But everyone agrees that the Maccabees won out in the end and imposed their version of Judaism on formerly Hellenized Jews. So Hanukkah, in essence, commemorates the triumph of fundamentalism over cosmopolitanism. Our assimilationist answer to Xmas is really a holiday about subjugating assimilated Jews. The more I thought about all of this, the more it disturbed me. For what am I if not a Hellenized Jew? Okay, an Americanized Jew, but what's the difference? I eat pork every so often. Before having children, my wife and I agonized over the question of circumcision. And while I've never offered burnt sacrifices to Zeus, I do go to yoga occasionally. When it comes down to it, it's pretty clear that the Maccabees would have hated me. They would have hated me because I'm assimilated and because I'm the product of intermarriage. And while I can't say for certain what the Maccabees would have thought about my fondness for Bernie Sanders or my practice of Reconstructionist Judaism, I'm pretty damn sure they wouldn't have liked those things either. Given all of this, there's a part of me that wants to skip out. How do we say? Gotta skip out the back, Jack. Hand over the key, Lee, yeah? There's a part of me that just wants to skip out on Hanukkah altogether. Why should I light candles and sing songs to celebrate a group of violent fundamentalists? The answer, frankly, is that it's not my choice. With my daughter ready to sign up for Team Santa, we have to celebrate something. And I'm not quite Hellenized enough to get an Xmas tree. So this year, for a lack of a better alternative, I'm going to try to embrace Hanukkah in all its contradictions. When I light the candles, I'm going to celebrate the possibility of light in dark times, the importance of even small miracles. And when everyone else is singing about the Maccabees, I'll be singing a prayer for those Hellenized Jews and for those renegade Jews of our times. Then I'm going to sneak my daughter an extra piece of chocolate gelt and break out the presents, because at the end of the day, it's all about beating out Santa. Woo! Gotta love it. Whew. That guy needs a couch. Well, he needs one of those doctor guys to help him out. Okay, gotta love it. Okay, for the true Hanukkah, we're back. We're true blues here. A quick summarization of last week's unbelievable class. Shocking! Oh, thank you, Mike. Mike, you're leaving the Bronx. You're leaving the New York for more the Hollywood side of life. Okay, I like that. Folks, a little 3-4 minute sum up of last week. Number one, we saw certain sources like the Tanna of Eliyahu that claimed this woman's name and her 7 sons was Miriam, the daughter of Tanchum. According to other sources, such as the Book of the Maccabees and Josephus, the name of the woman was Hanah and her 7 sons. Number two, what period of history did this take place? According to the Tanna of Eliyahu and other sources, this event took place at least 65 years after the destruction of Beitar, led by the revolt by Bar Kokhba, Italy, after that period of time, which was 65 years after the destruction of the Second Temple. According to the Book of the Maccabees and Josephus, this event took place during the time of the Second Temple, 5 years approximately before the revolution by the Hashmonaim, by the Maccabees. And the evil king was, in the time of Hanukkah, was named Antiochus. In the time of the first version of Miriam, that took place with the Caesar of Rome. His name was Adrianus. As far as the age of the kids, it does not say, except for the last child. The youngest kid, according to Tanna of Eliyahu and other places, it says that the kid was 2.5 years old. According to the Book of Josephus, the child was 7 years old. The smallest child was 7 years old. But anyways, you slice it, the kid was under the age of a bar mitzvah, a child that is not obligated to observe the commandments. Okay, next point. Afterwards, we asked 2 very, very difficult questions on this famous, lovable teddy bear, apple pie story of Hanukkah. 2 very difficult questions. First question, the last son, the king sees King Antiochus of the Syrian Greek Empire. He sees that he's lost all these 6 brothers. They are not agreeing to bow down to any idols, and they're not willing to discuss the issue. All of them prefer to die on sanctification of God's name. All 6 of them are killed in a gruesome manner by the king and his henchmen. As far as the last child, so the king is looking pretty bad. He's not able to put the fear of the idols into these Jews in front of thousands of spectators who are watching this, including Jewish spectators who were forced to come down to this, see this, in order to try to frighten them into surrendering and leaving their religion. And it's not working. So he's trying to find a way out. So he thinks up a great plan for this little kid. It's a win-win. WW situation. He comes up to the kid and said, listen, I'm going to, out of my pocket, I'm going to drop a ring or a coin or a insignia of mine. There's thousands of people here. There's lots going on. They're selling in the stands popcorn, beer, I don't know, kosher hot dogs or not, but they're selling a lot of stuff. No one's going to notice that I'm throwing something out of my pocket. Thousands of spectators here at the stadium. And you, of course, the king tells the little kid, you, of course, you have no intentions to worship idols. You have no thoughts of worshiping idols. You are just bending down and picking up this coin to give it to me back. Why is it win-win? You're not bowing down to idols. You just pick up this coin or this ring or insignia. And for the thousands of spectators here, they don't know about what fell out of my pocket. They can't see that. It's unnoticeable. They think that you bow down to the idols. Win for me, win for you. Okay? And the kid refuses. Now, this is very difficult according to Jewish law. Why? We mentioned, according to the Talmud in Avodah Zarah, page 12, which is brought down in Halacha. It's brought down by Maimonides in the Laws of Idol Worshipping 3.8. It's brought down also in the Code of Jewish Law 150/3. This is a simple law. The law is that in the good old days, there were at various public places in cities, they would put these interesting fountains where you could bend over and have a drink. Today, you put your finger on a button and comes out water. In those days, they would have bodies. From the bodies, statues of bodies would come out water, or there would be masks or faces, and from the face would come out water, okay? From the mouth, from the eyes, and a person would bend over and drink. We spoke about that there are different texts. Some of the texts, like the Talmud that we have, it does not say that there were idols in the area. Some texts claim that in order to attract more people for idol worshipping, they would make these fancy fountains, drinking fountains, with these fancy faces and architectural structures, in order to draw people into worshiping idols that were surrounding this fountain, this pool. But either way we slice it, it's really irrelevant, because whether there was idol worshipping on the sidelines or not, the Jewish law is clear that one is not allowed to take a drink from these fountains. Why? Because a Jew is not allowed to bring him or herself to a suspicion that they are doing something which is not kosher. And once you bow down and take a drink, people might think that you are bowing down to idols, because in many, many places there were idols that were surrounding these fountains, or the fountains themselves were idols, and that's how people would bow down. As they would take a drink, they would bow down to these fountains, which were idols in their own right. So we have a clear-cut Jewish law that you're not allowed to take a drink from these fountains, because you would be suspected. People that would see you possibly would think that you're worshiping idols, so we don't bring upon ourselves suspicion. Okay, and all of a sudden, from nowhere, we have a monkey wrench. The monkey wrench is thrown in by Rabbeinu Nissim, Ran, one of the Rishonim, one of the earlier sages, and he says, everyone agrees on that law, but what happens if there's a danger to a person's life? If there's a danger to a person's life, for example, somebody comes up to me and puts a gun to my head, and he says, listen, either you take a drink from that fountain, or I'm going to kill you. There's an obvious danger to my life here. What do? Do I the law says in regular circumstances, when there's no danger to my life, you're not allowed to bend over and take a drink from the fountain. But right now, the cards have changed. Right now, there's a danger to my life. What do I do then? The Ran, without blinking an eye, he says, no question here. On one hand, very simple, you put it on the scale, baby. On one hand, we have a rabbinical prohibition of not bringing upon yourself suspicion. There's a suspicion here that someone will look at you drinking from the fountain. They might come to the conclusion that maybe you're bowing down to idols. Okay? So that's a rabbinical prohibition. On the other hand, you have your life here. There's a Torah prohibition to put oneself into a danger to one's life in regular circumstances. So what do you do here? Ran says, no problem. You know what they say? Do run, run. Do run, run. As the song goes. So the Ran says, no, there's no question here. When you weigh the two, it's very simple that you better bed down and drink from that fountain. Because a person's life comes before a suspicion, even if it's a suspicion of idol worshipping. The Rama, the Ashkenazic Jewish law authority, comes down and agrees with the Ran. It says, right, if there's a danger to a person's life, you bend down and drink from that water fountain, even though you are causing yourself, you're bringing upon yourself a suspicion for worshiping idols. Okay, now, to make this even worse, we have the major league commentator on the Midrash Rabbah, which is the words of our sages, and his name is Yefeh Hanah. It's written by Rav Shmuel Ashkenazi, and he says an amazing new point. He says an amazing thing. He says, what's going on over here? Who in the world gave Hanah permission to endanger her kids? Not just the last kid, who happens to be, we know that he's below the age of 13, so he's not obligated for commandments, but for all the kids. Why? Because he says that just like in the times of the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar made a decree that all people had to bow down to a certain, we'll call it a certain statue. Now, we always were taught that this statue was a statue of idol worshipping. And even so, Jews did bow down. There were only a few Jews like Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah that did not bow down. But the rest of the Jews bowed down. Now this is very interesting. How could this be? This seems like astonishing. In the words of Mike, this is shocking. How can it be? We only found 3 Jews that don't bow down? So, the commentator Yefeh Hanah, he brings in many opinions that the reason why only 3 Jews didn't bow down is because of the fact that it wasn't idol worshipping. When King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylonia put up this statue, it was a statue of pride. It was a statue of honor. It had nothing to do with idol worshipping. Just as we said last week, when you go to most stadiums today, outside the perimeter of the stadium, you'll see idols, you'll see statues of great players playing for that team. If you go to Chicago, you'll see Billy Williams, you'll see Ernie Banks on the outside, Ron Santo. You'll see, if you remember any of these names, you'll see the statues of them outside. So what's the problem? They're just statues to honor these players. They're not idol worshipping. So the Yefeh Hanah says, what in the world is going on here? Who in the world gave permission to Miss Hanah or Mrs. Hanah? She was a widow, Mrs. Hanah. Who gave her permission to encourage her sons to give up their lives? When we're talking here about statues that are not idol-worshipping statues just to honor different people in that empire. And how much more so for the last kid who the only problem is that he might be suspected of bowing down not to idols, of bowing down to these statues that were erected for honoring people. So it's only a rabbinical prohibition to be suspected of bowing down to idols. And on the other hand, we have people's lives here. Why in the world were they encouraged, all these kids, and how much more so the youngest one, when we're only talking here perhaps about a suspicion? People might have thought that these boys were bowing down to idols, idol worshiping. It's only a suspicion. Because according to the Hanah, the bottom line was they were really statues to honor different issues or people.
But can't you ask the same question on Hananiah, Mishael, and
Of course.
Azariah? So then what business did they have to sacrifice their lives, the rest of it?
Of course. That's the same question. Same question we have on them. Why did they do
But
it?
isn't there a law of Yaharek Val Yavor, even if it's just the color of the shoelace or something?
Time out on the court. We're getting to that. Slowly, Mike, you already jumped into the 9th inning here. We're taking it step by step. We will get to the shoelaces. Okay, right now we're talking difficulties here. Okay, that's our first difficulty. When you have suspicion of idol worshiping and threat to your life, there's no question here. According to the Ran, according to the Ramah, and according to the commentator on Maimonides, the the Maser Rokeach, he also says that according to Maimonides, even if there is a danger to one's life, then one must prostrate themselves and take a drink from those fountains, because a person's life is much more important. The Torah teaches us that to live by the commandments and not die by the commandments. That was our first problem. Our second problem, even more difficult, is that we know that a Jew or a Jewess is obligated to observe commandments, a boy, a male from the age of 13, a female from the age of 12. Now, at least the last kid, he was either 7 years old or 2.5 years old. So he's not of age. So he does not have the positive commandment, one of the big 613 commandments, to sanctify God's name and give up his life. It says, "V'nigdashti betoch bnei Yisrael," I will be sanctified amongst the people amongst the Jewish people, in the book of Leviticus, in the portion of Emor. So, what in the world is going on? Why is this mother Hanah? Why is she cheering on and encouraging this little boy to give up his life when he is not obligated for any of the commandments? So therefore, he's not only not obligated for any of the commandments, now his life is in danger, and for observing a commandment which he is not obligated, you're putting his life on the line? Who gave you the right? We said in the name of the Tosfot, one of the rabbis in the times of the Tosfot, when there were decrees against Jews that they were presented the choice, either Christianity or the sword or your life, and there was a rabbi who took Jewish kids, and he was afraid that once these Jewish kids would come up to these big adults and big soldiers and big officials, and they would be given the choice and they would be threatened, they would be so frightened that they would agree to, God forbid, become Gentiles, become Christians. So therefore, in order that they die Jewish and they not convert, there was a rabbi who at the time of the Crusades took Jewish children and one after another slaughtered them, killed them. One of the authors of the Tosfot on the Talmud comes up to him and he says, "You are a murderer. You are a murderer for murdering these kids. These kids are not obligated in commandments, and they're certainly not obligated to give up their lives. And you are a murderer. Those are the words. Those are the words that this Torah scholar of the Tosfot group, he calls another rabbi a murderer. Not only that, he says, the rabbi of the Tosfot says, if I am correct that what you're doing is wrong and it's murder, then you, rabbi, who are a murderer, you will be caught by the enemy and you will be put to death in an extremely excruciating and cruel way. Sure enough, or as they say in my neighborhood, sure enough, the rabbi is caught in a short time afterwards, and he's put to death in a very cruel manner. Wow. I mean, it's an amazing, he pulled out that bunny rabbit from the hat. He was right on. Jimmy the Greek is nothing compared to this, putting the bets down. So isn't this a great proof, dear friends, that what this rabbi did, this rabbi murderer of taking kids because he doesn't want them to become Christians and he wanted to make sure that they would die as Jews? Isn't this a clear proof by the fact that he was caught in a short time and he was put to death in a cruel fashion? Isn't this proof for the other side? And then we turn to Hanah. Hanah, how did you encourage your children that were at least below the age of commandments, 13, 12? How did you allow yourself to encourage them to give up their lives? Where this rabbi of the Tosfot, he calls this other rabbi a murderer? Would we, God forbid, say that towards what Hanah did? Would we say that to her face? Or not even on the sidelines? That's where we left off last week. So, folks, pull on a seatbelt right now, and we're going to go. And the real story, the real shocking story of Hanah and his 7 sons. How was this possible? How did she allow this to go on? So let's do it. Oh, one last thing I almost forgot. It says in the Laws of Maimonides, the Foundations of the Torah, chapter 5. Chapter 5 is full of laws of sanctification of God's name. And Maimonides brings down in the 3rd law, he brings down examples of Jews that sanctified God's name. Let's look at the list and let's see who's missing from this list. He brings down people such as Daniel when they threw him into the pit because of praying. He brings down Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah that refused to bow down to the statue of Nebuchadnezzar. According to many opinion, this was idol worshipping. He brings down Rabbi Akiva, who, along with 9 other rabbis during the time of the Roman Empire, gave up of their lives. And he speaks about these are the great Jews that were killed by the kingdoms, and no one can come close to them. No one can these are the untouchables. They are so great, they are so holy, they're so high. Untouchables. Folks, where's Hanah and her 7 kids? I mean, this was unbelievable. A mother that was willing to give up 7 of her kids. Rabbi Akiva was Rabbi Akiva. He was one. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they were each individuals. Daniel was an individual. But why did Maimonides forget what seems like the highest pedestal of sacrificing one's life? Hanah and her 7 sons. It's not there. Why? Maybe we'll say that the Maimonides did not agree. Like we've said up till now, there are a lot of Jewish laws that collide with contradict to what Hanah did. Okay. So put on your seatbelts and we're rolling here. First question. When there's a suspicion to worshiping idols and a danger to one's life, we saw opinion that one has to prostrate themselves or bow down and drink from those fountains. Even though you're bringing upon yourself a suspicion to worshiping idols, you must save your life and bow down and drink from those fountains. So it seems like this kid and the mother were incorrect in what they did. But not so fast. Not so fast, Lee. Take it away. We have the Jewish law, the great Jewish law rabbis, such as the Tur and the Rashba, who come out against what the Ran and the Ramah say. In their opinion, when we're talking about idol worshiping, even though there's a suspicion that just like you're drinking from this fountain and you might be suspected of bowing down to idols, this is not a case of, okay, you're endangering your life. This is a Torah prohibition against suspicion of perhaps worshiping idols, which would be a rabbinical prohibition. Of course, the Torah prohibition comes first. Guard your life, protect your life. No, comes the Tur and comes the Rashba with an amazing line. This is different because this is a connection to idol worshiping. And when something is connected to idol worshiping, it becomes a part of the prohibition to worship idols. So it's not a rabbinical versus Torah prohibition, which is an easy equation. No, it's Torah against Torah. So we have a Torah prohibition to bring upon ourselves a suspicion to worshiping idols, and we have a Torah prohibition to guarding our lives, protecting our lives. What takes precedent? So the Torah and the Rashba says, give up your lives, because this takes precedence. The bringing upon yourself a suspicion of worshiping idols is so serious, it's one of the 3 cardinal sins that you must give your life for. So Hanah and her kids were right on the money in giving up their lives, because this is a paragraph. This is a connection to idol worshiping. It's not a regular case. Okay, the Radbaz. The Radbaz was a rabbi in Cairo, in Egypt, and he had thousands of questions and answers that he was asked over the years. And very interesting, he has a text, the Radbaz, Rabbi David ben Zimra. He has a text that, very interesting, that there in his text, handwritten by Maimonides, it says there that if a person's life is in danger and they are being coerced to drink from this fountain, in such a case, because it's a suspicion of worshiping idols, it's considered to be such a great transgression, it's connected to idol worshiping, one must give up their lives. So we have Maimonides once again lifting up the like sign to Hanah and her 7 sons, according to the text that the Radbaz had. Next, it says in the same Maimonides that we quoted, it says in the same Maimonides, in the chapter of the Foundations of Torah, chapter 5, Law 3, it says that a person must, that if a person is threatened, if a life of a person is threatened, and because of various commandments, then a person must transgress the commandments and save his life. However, there are some exceptions to the rule. 1, there are 3 cardinal sins: worshiping idols, that you give your life. Number 2, if they are coercing you to kill somebody else. Number 3, if they are coercing you into doing something which is immodest sexual behavior. In these three cases, also Maimonides would say that you must give up your life. However, Maimonides in this law, in Law 3, he says very clearly that if there are decrees, if this happens to be a time in Jewish history where there are decrees against Judaism, this is not some Joe knocking on your door. Hey, can you cook me up some, it's on the Sabbath, can you cook me up some of that Jewish cholent? Man, can you make me up some of that Jewish cholent, some of that kugel? Man, we love that stuff. But listen, it's my Sabbath, we don't cook. We make it yesterday. We made it yesterday. No, I want it now. I want it fresh, off the press. So in such a case, of course, you would not give up your life because this guy, Joe down the block, he's just hungry and he's not interested in your Sabbath or not keeping Sabbath. He's just hungry and he loves that Jewish food. He wants that cholent. Who doesn't? So Maimonides says, if this is a time where there are decrees by the empire, by the government, by the king against Jewish practice, this is an exception to the rule. And even though it might not be the 3 cardinal sins which are forbidden, it might be one of the 613 commandments. A person must give up their life if there are decrees. And of course, this is a time where there were tremendous decrees against Judaism. You were not allowed to keep Sabbath. This was the law. You were not allowed to decide when the new month would begin. You were not allowed to circumcise your child. Women were not allowed to go to these to the mikveh, to these purification pools. There were many, many decrees that were going. You were not allowed to keep Sabbath. There were many, many decrees at this time. So therefore, very simple. Maimonides says, right, I tell you, in usual circumstances, you must protect your life and transgress most of the commandments. However, if there are decrees against Judaism, then for every commandment, you would be obligated to give up your life rather than transgress. Now, the question, of course, you're all thinking, I'm sure, is what if it's a rabbinical prohibition? Let's say there's a decree. Let's say there's a decree against a rabbinical prohibition. You're not, right, you have to, on the Sabbath, you have to move your TV sets, you have to move your screens, and of course this is a biblical prohibition. This is a rabbinical prohibition called mukse. There are certain things you're not allowed to lift or move on the Sabbath. And your TV screen or your computer is one of them. And let's say that happens in the decree that all the Jews have to lift up their TV sets and move them, lift up money on the Sabbath. These are all rabbinical problems. Do you have to give up your life? Now comes in the Pri Chadash, one of the leading Jewish law authorities, and he says, according to Maimonides, not only a Torah prohibition at the time where there are decrees against the Jewish religion, against various commandments, then a person must give up their lives for all commandments. We might think that the Maimonides is just talking about a Torah commandment, that you must give up your life. No! Comes the Pri Chadash, the commentator, and he says, Maimonides agrees that even if there is a rabbinical, and more so, even if there is a custom, Mike asked here, what happened? There were certain times in history where Jews had a custom of going with certain colors of shoelaces, and let's say the government, let's say the empire, the king, decreed that Jews can no longer go with their colored shoelaces. Right? There's a custom of the Jews for various reasons why they do it. They want to be humble. They want a humble color. And now you're going to have to go with green. Everyone has to go now with green and blue and pink shoelaces. So, even a custom, according to the law, when there are decrees against the Torah, even a custom, you must give up your life if this is a time of decree. And of course, with Hanah and her 7 sons, this was a terrible period of history where the Jewish people for many, many years before they woke up and revolted against the Syrian Greeks, years went by till the Jews woke up and revolted. So this was definitely a time of decrees. So you get a like. Hanah, you did the right thing. And her kids, they get another one. They get a big one over there. Okay, so we have a time of decree, which is an exception to the rule. We have another exception to the rule. This one, Mike was asking about Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. According to the opinion that these statues were not idol worshipping, they were just statues honoring various personalities or various issues. Why in the world did Hananiah and Mishael Azariah give up their lives? The rest of the Jewish people didn't have any problem bowing down. They didn't have any problem. So what's the problem here? So then we have an important paragraph in Jewish law. Listen closely. There are many Jewish law authorities that do not agree with Maimonides. Maimonides says very clearly that when the law says that you must transgress a commandment, then you must transgress the commandment. There is no room here to be pious, to be righteous more than thou, and sacrifice your life. No. Because the Torah tells us that the commandments were given to us to live by them and not to die by them. So you have to live. And therefore, in order to live, you must transgress almost all the commandments unless there's exception to the rule situation. 1, the 3 cardinal sins. 2, there's a time of decree against the Jewish people. Those are exceptions to the rules. But in regular circumstances, when you are not obligated, when it's forbidden for a person to give up their lives, anyone that does it, not only is he not righteous and pious, he's a transgressor, he's a sinner. He's a murderer, he murdered himself. Committed suicide. That's pretty serious. However, that's Maimonides. But according to leading Jewish law authorities, such as, we're just going to give a few of them over here, jot it down. According to the Chinuch, the book of the Chinuch, which is a discussion on the 613 commandments, disagrees. And if a person wants to sanctify God's name, even though the law at the time is that for this commandment you do not have to, or for this predicament you do not have to sacrifice your life, you are allowed to be stringent upon yourself and give up your life. This was done throughout Jewish history. People gave up their lives for the 4 species on Sukkot. You know, the lulav and the etrog that we shake, people gave up their lives. People gave up their lives when they put on tefillin, those boxes. It's too hard of a word in English for me to remember, something with phalanth or something. People gave up their lives. People gave up their lives to circumcise males at 8 days, and the list goes on and on and on. The Yavetz. Okay, the Yavetz, Rav Yaakov Emden, he writes also that a person is allowed to be strict and stringent upon themselves, even when the law says that you're supposed to transgress the commandments in order to survive. If you want to be strict upon yourself and sanctify God's name, this is a sanctification of God's name. Trumat Hadeshen, in his book, paragraph 199, comments the same idea. The Sefer Mitzvot Ktanot, the Samak, he writes this in the 3rd paragraph, the same concept. Bedek HaBayit of the Rashba, he also writes down this same concept, that a person is allowed to be strict and stringent with himself and sacrifice his life in order to sanctify God's name, disputing Maimonides' rule. Okay, so there's a lot of room here for Hanah and her 7 sons to maneuver here, to sanctify. It might have been that according to the law, they could have opted out. They could have backed down. But they wanted to sanctify God's name, and many, many other reasons we just brought out, which give them 100% or almost 100% justification for their acts. And they are really heroes of the Jewish people. We asked the question, how come Maimonides does not bring down the case, the unbelievable case? It should have taken a gold medal in the Olympics of Jewish heroism. Why didn't he not bring down Hanah and her 7 sons? He brought an individual here, individual there, Daniel, Rabbi Akiva, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. He brought down a lot of individuals. But this lady is unbelievable. Man, she gave up 7 of her kids. Okay? We don't have this every single day. But folks, there's an expression in Torah that many times the Torah might be poor, so to speak, in one area, which means you're learning verses, and it seems like there's not a lot of information here. So you might give up hope. You might say, okay, there's not a lot of information here. I'm just going to, give up. Don't give up, because keep on looking, and you'll find in other places, you'll find this case and a lot of more details. So the Torah is in some places very poor, skimpy details, and in other places it expands on the ideas. So the same here. It's right, you did look in Maimonides and it's not there, but you didn't look well enough. Why? Because in the Rambam's book called it was a letter for the Jewish community of Morocco that were being forced to accept Islam by the Muslims. He wrote a letter, so to speak, to the Moroccan community, and it's called Igeret Hashmad, which will translate it into the protocols of a time of decrees. And here he writes, listen to this, here he writes the following, that there were, throughout the times, there were many Jews that sanctified God's name. There were at least 10 Jews in presence. For example, he brings down Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, Daniel. He brings down all the 10 rabbis who died at the hands of the Roman Empire. And then Hanah and her 7 sons. So Maimonides, in a different book of his, includes tremendously Hanah and her 7 sons. We had an idea that perhaps Maimonides was against what Hanah and her 7 sons did, because maybe according to the letter of the law, they did not have to sacrifice their life. And according to Maimonides, if you don't have to sacrifice your life, then if you are strict and stringent upon yourself, you're doing the wrong thing. In fact, you are committing suicide, and you're going to have to pay the price when you get up to heaven. You're going to have to pay the price. So that's our first response. That's our first response. Second question, put on another seatbelt. This is really unbelievable. Our second question was, how do we explain Hanah encouraging her children when we know at least one of the kids was below the age of bar mitzvah, of observing the commandments? Now this is beautiful. If you open up Maimonides, the foundations of the Torah, chapter 5, he begins with the following words. Kol Beit Yisrael mitzuvim. All the house of Israel is commanded to sanctify God's name. Wow, what poetic language, Maimonides. What in the world? If you look in the entire volume after volume of Maimonides, you will not find this language. The whole house of Israel is obligated to sanctify God's name. Maimonides tells us this commandment, men are obligated. He'll tell us in another instance, this commandment, women are commanded, or men and women are commanded. What is this funky language? The entire house of Israel is commanded to sanctify God's name. Folks, I mean, get out those bats, because we're going for a grand slam here. We're just going to hit this sucker out of here.
If the Rambam felt that you were required to give up your life or risk your life in these circumstances, he would have had to say that. This is a textbook of laws. You can't leave it to, nice Hanukkah drushes and Tapuach possibly to reach this conclusion. No, I mean, he has to say this. This is a matter of life or death issue. If he felt that way, he would have to write that out, spell that out.
He spelled it out. He said in the time of decrees, according to Maimonides.
That's in a nice book of emotions and of chizuk for the people of Yemen or whatever, Morocco.
Put on another seatbelt, Mike.
No.
Unless if you want to say that the Rambam holds that you're not obligated to, but you're allowed to in this type of situation. And that's why he didn't mention it as
I'm not talking about the Moroccan. I'm not talking about the community of Morocco. I'm talking about, we mentioned about 20 minutes ago, we have 3 or 4 different answers for what Maimonides wrote. One of the answers that we mentioned was that, of course, Maimonides says that a person must guard their life because it says in the Torah you're obligated to live by the commandments and not die by them. However, if there is a time of decrees against Judaism or various commandments, Maimonides, of course, agrees with this basic Jewish law that in such a time, everybody would be obligated to give up their lives for these commandments.
Even a minor.
What?
Even a minor.
I didn't say that. You said that. We're going to go into it right now.
Can we say, though, that halachically there are 3 statuses? There was a situation where you're obligated to, another situation where you're not obligated to, and if you do it, you're mitchayev b'nafshecha because you commanded to live and you've committed suicide. And there's a 3rd level where you're entitled to, where you're not obligated to.
If you're asking about Maimonides, Maimonides is on his own pedestal. He writes very seriously that if this is a circumstance where you don't have to, there is no room to be pious, there is no room to be stringent upon yourself. In fact, what you're doing is the wrong thing. But however, that's Maimonides. That doesn't mean that we brought in at least 7 opinions here, and there are more, that disagree and say no. In such circumstances, a person would be allowed to be stringent upon themselves, even though according to the letter of the law, you can get out of it. But you are considered to be a holy person by the fact that you're strict upon yourself, and you don't have to, but if you do it, you sanctify God's name. This has been done throughout all of Jewish history. This is the path that the Jews have taken. Question, what about kids? Right? What would Maimonides say about kids? Oh, this is the question now. So, folks, slamming it out of the park. This is an unbelievable. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. Yeah, he's one of the greats in America, maybe right behind Rav Moshe Feinstein, Zatzal. In his commentary on the Torah, Emet LeYaakov, on the portion of Emor, an unbelievable chidush, unbelievable take of Maimonides. Listen to what he says. He says, why in the world does Maimonides begin the chapter of sanctification of God's name with the words, all the household of Israel? Why doesn't he tell us males and females are obligated? And then we would know that we're talking about males that are at least the age of 13 and women that are at least the age of 12. What is this poetic language? All the house of Israel. And he says an amazing thing. You know why Maimonides said this? Because of the fact that Maimonides wanted to tell us that this includes children. This includes children. That's why the entire house of Israel. What's the house of Israel? The house of Israel includes children, minors. that they are also obligated. And he proves, unbelievable proof. It says in this portion, Leviticus 23:33, if I'm not mistaken. He writes, look at the language of the verse, V'nigdashti b'toch b'nei Israel. If there was an obligation for people that were of age, which the verse should have said, okay, V'kidashti, or V'kidashta, you shall sanctify. If God is turning to the Jewish people and saying, you shall sanctify, that would be a person that's obligated to sanctify. But that's not what it says. It says, V'nigdashti. The result should be, my name should be sanctified. The result. Folks, it's an amazing thing. So therefore, Rav Kamenetsky brings down that children are also obligated. Why? Because if a child comes before a king, a soldier, before wicked people and sanctify God's name, in the end of the day, there has been a sanctification of God's name. We have a child that spits in the face of the government, of the king, of the emperor, and says, to hell with you, man. I'm not listening to you. I'm giving up my life. Tremendous sanctification of God's name. So, according to Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, explaining Maimonides, that a child is also a child in his own circumstances, creates a situation where there was a sanctification of God's name. Doesn't matter how old he is. This is an exception to the rule. When it comes to sanctifying God's name, we're not interested in how old you are, because everybody's obligated. The idea is, the bottom line is, to sanctify God's name, to stand up, to be proud, and don't buckle, and stand up. So therefore, if you do that, you create a sanctification of God's name. Jewish people are not frightened, and the Jewish people will keep the Torah till the very end. That's our flag, and that's what we stand for, and you could do whatever you want. So therefore, in the end of the day, the children are part of a sanctification of God's name. He goes further. We're not going to go into this. An amazing concept. He says, you know what? You know who had grandchildren learning Torah in Bnei Brak? Man, you're not going to believe this. You know who, Lee? Hey, man. Haman. Woo! That guy wanted to kill the Jewish people. What are you, crazy? He had kids. He had great-grandchildren that learned Torah. Man, this guy should have his kids killed. This guy is a wicked guy. The Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky said, in the end of the day, he created, not that he wanted to, but he created a situation where God's name was sanctified. He made a decree against the Jewish people to kill out all the Jewish people. In the end of the day, it did not come into fruition. Not only did it not come in, he was destroyed, and all of his people were destroyed. So because of the fact that he has a hand in a roundabout way of bringing upon a sanctification of God's name, God must reward him that his ancestors, his great-great-grandchildren, learned Torah in Bnei Brak. Amazing concept. Because when it comes to the commandment of sanctifying God's name, it's an exception to the rule. The idea is to be in a situation where God's name is sanctified in front of the world. That's the bottom line. And it doesn't matter what your name is. Your name could be Haman, or your name could be, Hanah and her 7 sons. That's the bottom line. So this is an amazing concept brought down by Rav Kamenetsky. You might think maybe he's alone in this. He ain't alone in this. Listen to this. The famous book called the Aguda. The Aguda brings down on page 202 on the Tractate of Gittin. Listen to his words. Usually, a person is not allowed to take their lives. You're not allowed to do bodily damage to oneself. You're not allowed to harm yourself in Judaism. However, he writes the following, that if a person is afraid that the Gentiles will cause them pain, and therefore because they're causing them pain, we will capitulate and give in and transgress commandments in certain situations, like their decrees against the Jewish people, not in every situation, but when it comes to that time, listen to what he says. You would be allowed to take your lives before they come. There's a famous story about 93 girls that were in Germany, and the Nazis came to abuse them sexually. 93 girls from the Beit Yaakov school, somewhere in Germany, and they got wind about this, that the Nazis were coming, and they all went. One of the girls went out to find poison, and they all were given 93 beautiful souls. May their blood be avenged. They were all given these poison pills, and they all said, Shema Yisrael, God is one, and they took these pills so that these Nazis would not have their way with these Jewish girls. Tremendous holy souls. They took their life. You're not allowed to take your life? It's a Torah prohibition? No. If you are afraid that the Gentiles will abuse you in a sexual manner, or you are afraid that the Gentiles will put pressure upon you in order to convert, or in order to transgress, you are allowed to preempt them and take your own lives. And listen to what he says, the Aguda, This is what he says. And from here, we learn the lesson that we've seen throughout the ages, that people killed themselves and their children when there were times of decrees against Judaism and the Jewish religion. People took their own lives and the lives of their children. But children aren't obligated? Not so. Children are obligated. We saw by Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, we saw in the words of the Rambam. Listen to this. That's not only the idea behind the Aguda. We have also the Rekanati in the chapter 69. He says that those that are fearful that the Gentiles will put tremendous pressure upon them and force them to transgress commandments or to convert, they are allowed to kill themselves. And they are considered to be holy Jews, like all other Jews that sanctify God's name, even though they took their own lives. They didn't come to that point. The Gentiles didn't come up to them and say, listen, either you transgress or your life. It didn't get to that. Before the Gentiles came, we wanted to make sure that we would die Jews. That's what we're talking about here. It's not like somebody coming in front of you and giving you the option. That's a clear case. We're talking about a case, no one's coming up to you. You're in your own house. In the meantime, nobody's outside your front door waiting to break it down in order to give you the choice. You're in your own friendly confines. And he says, that's why we see in Torah sources, for example, that in the time of when the Romans destroyed the Jewish temple, there were 400 children that jumped off a boat in order to commit suicide because they were worried, they got wind that the Romans had prepared to abuse them sexually once they get to wherever they were going to. So they decided that in such a case that they are not going to abuse us sexually, which is a transgression of the Torah, and we are going to preempt them. And they jumped into the sea, and these people are considered to be holy. But it's not only the Rekanati, it's not only the Aguda. Let's look at the Ritva on the Tractate of Avodah Zarah, page 18, side 1. Listen to what he says. He talks about King Saul. King Saul took his own life. Why? He was worried that once the Philistines grab him, they were going to torture him and this would be very, very fearful and frightful for the Jewish people. And he didn't want this to happen. He didn't want to be tortured. He knew he would be tortured. He took his own life. So there are certain circumstances when you know that you're going to be tortured and not be able to stand up to it, where you are allowed to preempt. And therefore, listen to what he says. And not only King Saul. And from King Saul, throughout the ages, Jews learned that they are allowed to sacrifice their kids. They would kill their kids before it came down to the Gentiles coming and offering them, so to speak, offering them the choice of the sword or Christianity. And parents took the lives of their kids, killed their kids, in order that they would die Jews and they would not be traumatized. They would never face such a question. And listen to these words. Even though these actions by these parents taking the lives of their kids, we said, according to many opinion, kids are not obligated for this commandment like any other commandment. How much more so to sacrifice your life, to put yourself in danger? It's not a simple issue. The Ritva writes, even though this is not a simple issue, and we have to check this very carefully. Even so, this is the law that has been handed down to us. This is the law. This is the tradition that has been handed down to us. The sacrifice of children, sacrifice of parents, not ever dying as Jews, and not allowing the kids to be faced with that predicament. And therefore, we heard that in France, this was considered to be the Jewish law, put into practice. So that's the Ritva on page 18. Listen to this, a beautiful Darkei Tshuva on the Darkei Tshuva. Commentary lived about 150 years ago. He commentates on the Code of Jewish Law. We're on Yoredei 157, chapter Law 3. An unbelievable Torah that he says. Listen to his words. He says, I remember, it's in my mind engraved. This is Darkei Tshuva, the commentator saying, that I remember seeing one of the answers. There were questions and answers of one of the leading Sephardic law authorities, Jewish law authorities. I don't remember his name and I don't remember the book, but I remember it very clearly in my mind. And he asked the question, are children obligated to sacrifice their lives for Torah and for the commandments? And he says the following, are you allowed to give them a suggestion to take their own lives so they don't come to that frightful experience of being intimidated by the Gentiles in order to convert? They shouldn't face such a situation. Or perhaps because they are not obligated to observe commandments, maybe we should tell them that they should transgress all these laws and not give up their lives because they're children and children are not obligated. And I remember his words. He says that a child is obligated like everybody else to give up their lives. A child also has to give up their lives because there is an idea with giving up, there's an idea of sanctification of God's name, that the end result is what's important here. And if there's a sanctification of God's name at the end of the day, then children are connected. Children are obligated also to create a situation where God's name will be sanctified. And listen to his great words. You'll ask me, this is Darkei Tshuva now, you'll ask me, why does it seem like the Beit Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Cairo, one of the author of the Code of Jewish Law, what could we say more than that? It seems like he was agreeing with the rabbi of the Tosfot that called this other rabbi a murderer because he was killing off kids, so they would not be faced with the temptation of giving, of converting to Christianity instead of giving up their lives. How do we explain that? It seems like Rav Yosef Cairo agreed with the rabbis of the Tosfot that those children should not have been killed. And he says an unbelievable answer. He says very clearly, Beit Yosef and the rabbis of the Tosfot, they were talking about a situation where the hand of death is not at our door. This is a situation where there are rumors, where there are threats, but right now, nobody's at my front door. Nobody is surrounding the building over here. They're not surrounding, they're not in our front door. And therefore, in such a situation, therefore a person, we might try to hide the kids or put them up with some other family or to escape. However, when push comes to shove, even the Beit Yosef will agree. And even the authors of the Tosfot that call this rabbi a murderer, they also would agree. When it comes push to shove, when the Gentiles are in your face, when they're at your door, when they're surrounding the building, and they're giving you the choice, also a child is obligated in such a circumstance. Only when it's far off, when the threat is a threat, but it's not an immediate threat, it's a far-off threat, then you would not be allowed to kill these children, because there's a lot of ways to save them by escaping or hiding, whatever, till the decree is over. But when push comes to shove, and you have face-to-face with the enemy, a kid is also obligated. Amazing. So that's the Darkei Tshuva on the Code of Jewish Law 157. An amazing take by the book Tovat Safun, page 402. He gives an amazing answer. Amazing answer on Maimonides. Okay, and this one is for Brother Mike. Another answer on Maimonides. He says, you know what? What does Maimonides say? Maimonides says, listen, when the Torah does not obligate you to give your life, you're not allowed to give your life. Why? Because there's a Torah commandment to live by the commandments and not die by them. So you're not allowed to be strict upon yourself. However, kids are not obligated. A child below the age of 13 for a male or 12 for a female, they are not obligated in the Torah commandment of to live by the commandments and not die by the commandments. So therefore, because they are not part of the commandment to live, therefore they are allowed to be strict upon themselves and give up their lives even though they're not of age, because they do not have the responsibility that an older person has to live by the commandments and not die. So if you're supposed to live and you choose to die, according to Maimonides, you've done the wrong thing. But children are not commanded to live by the commandments and not die by the commandments. Therefore, even according to Maimonides, they would be this would be a commendable action by the kids. And that's what the Tovat Safun writes. And he brings down various proofs to his words. So we have it over there. The last two things, last two quickies that we have here. Folks, an amazing thing. We have a commentary on the ethics of the fathers. It's called the Maharal. Not the Maharal that you're thinking of, but Maharal with an aleph in the middle over there. It's Rabbi Aryeh Tzins. And this was about 200 years ago, and he writes the following. You might look at Abraham and say, what's the big deal with Abraham? Abraham gave up his life. He was willing to give up his life and not bow down to the idols. He was thrown into a fire by the king Nimrod. He was willing to give up his life. So you might say, what's the big deal? Because throughout history, there are people that not only gave up their lives, they gave up the lives of their family. They gave up everything. There were communities that were destroyed. There were entire families that were destroyed. The Tzanzer Rebbe, he lost all of his 10 kids. He lost his wife in the Holocaust. So what's the big deal about Abraham sacrificing his life? He says here, the Maharal, he says an amazing thing. We see throughout history that children gave up their lives in order not to be converted by the Gentiles. So he's writing in black and white. He's telling us that kids who are not obligated, we would think they're not obligated for the 613 commandments. One of the 613 commandments is that a person has to guard their lives and not put yourself in dangerous situations. We would think that, that would be problematic. No problem at all. So what's so special about Abraham? You know what's special about Abraham? Because the only reason that the Jewish people are so willing, whether they're children or not, adults, male, females, the whole house of Israel, in the words of Maimonides, why is the entire house of Israel willing to sacrifice their lives? You know why? Because of one guy. His name is Abraham. And when Abraham, our father, when he put his life on the line, he was willing to die in order not to transgress God's commandments. That put in the Jewish DNA for all times, for all generations, the willingness to give up our lives. That is the prototype of all Jewish sacrifice. So it is true that people gave up entire families. They gave up their entire families. But the only reason we have this ability is thanks to Abraham. Now this is a last doozer here. The last doozer here is we know that Abraham's mother, her name was Amtalai, the daughter of Carneval. And the Ramah of Pano, he says an amazing line. Listen to this. He says that Amtalai, but the daughter of Carneval, the mother of Abraham, she had to come back. She had to be reincarnated. Why? Because she taught her son Abraham that you must worship idols. That was their schooling. That was the schooling that Abraham received, that you do worship idols. And how much more so, of course, you wouldn't give your life for not worshiping them. So she had to come back reincarnated. Who does she come back as? This is the Ramah of Pano. He says an amazing line. She had to come back being reincarnated as who? You got it. Hanah. Hanah of the story of Hanukkah and her 7 sons. She had to come back and sacrifice not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, 7 sons in order to correct, to bring upon a tikkun, to fix the damage that she had done, what she had taught her children, like Abraham, to worship idols. She had to repent, and repenting means to go the opposite side. And she had to come back, and it's terrible. But that's, in order to purify herself, that's what she had to do. And she came back. Amtalai, the mother of Abraham, came back generations later in the time of Hanukkah and sanctified God's name, not only with her kids, but with herself. So, Jewish heroes, Hanah and her 7 sons.
You could say that it's a bigger deal what Avram did than what kids do. Chronicles that those are mitzuvah or 7 Mishayin or mitzuvah.
Oh, the camera's finished?
Yeah, you can shut it.